The goal is deconstructing without departing. We want to travel back in time, let people tell their stories of the things they've walked through so that we can help people who are moving forward in time without making mistakes. It's okay to ask questions. Take your time. Welcome back to Renovating Faith. It has been quite a while since our last episode, and we've been really busy at work. Had to go to Florida for a funeral. Our guests have had a lot going on in their lives, and just in general, it's just crazy. We had an entire soccer season with my 6-year-old. Yeah, just seems like lots going on. And we had a couple times we tried to record and life just got in the way, and but we have stayed in touch with these guys that we're talking to tonight, and I'm excited about our topic. We're going to continue our series in 2 Peter. So we've got again with us Stephen. I almost called you Stephen Ferrier.
Man, I
That would
would
have been
be wildly offended.
really, really bad. And I'm now realizing am drawing a complete blank. I see your name every day on Facebook, and Ferris. There we go.
Yes. Hey, it's on the screen if it
It's
helps.
actually not on my screen. It disappeared.
Oh, it's on
Normally it
mine.
is.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know why, but maybe it's because I hit the record button or something. But oh, that was really embarrassing. You're not gonna let me live that one down, I'm sure. Um,
that's all right.
Anyway,
I didn't
Stephen
pick it.
Ferris and Jordan Ferrier. This is what happens when you pick two people with similar last names. Oh, anyway, all right. Let the roast begin. This was terrible. I feel like we should just restart. Anyway, tonight we're going to continue our series in 2 Peter chapter 1. Stephen has actually got this on a document. Stephen, if you'll go ahead and throw that up. Um,
Yeah.
we're gonna look at this because he's kind of highlighted our first topic for us. Um, and so I'm gonna zoom in just a little if I can without making this go crazy. Maybe not. Uh, There we go. I actually have to be on it. Okay. So we started off this series and went through kind of just a big introduction, and these guys were absolutely amazing. It went far longer than anticipated, and every bit of it was incredible. So I think we ended up with a 2 episode introduction on this. And then we talked about faith and virtue on our last episode. So tonight we're going to pick up and we'll start reading. Well, why wouldn't just start at the beginning? Stephen, do you want to go ahead and just kick this off?
Yeah. So you want me to just read through?
Go for it.
All right. Simon Peter, a bondservant and apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who have received a faith of the same kind as ours by the righteousness of our God and Savior Jesus Christ. Grace and peace be multiplied to you in the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord, seeing that his divine power has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness, through the true knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. For by these he has granted to us his precious and magnificent promises, so that by them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world by lust. Now for this very reason also, applying all diligence, in your faith supply moral excellence, and in your moral excellence knowledge, and in your knowledge self-control, and in your self-control perseverance, and in your perseverance godliness, and in your godliness brotherly kindness, and in your brotherly kindness love. For if these qualities are yours and increasing, they render you neither useless nor unfruitful in the true knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ.
I I
Whole
am
chapter or stop
no,
there?
no, no, that's perfectly fine. This whole time, I just got to admit that I really wish I had you actually reading from my Bible app. Like you have that voice, man, that I always wanted to grow up and be a bass singer, and complete opposite happened. But I'm like sitting here listening to him reading. I'm like, oh, I could wake up to this. This is good. This makes me want to read the Bible. You're far better than half the people on the app. So anyway, not to butter you up. I was just that's a really
I'm no ESV guy, but the NASB guy, I could probably give him a run for his money.
Well, I'm sure we can find one that hasn't been recorded yet. How do you feel about the messianic versions? They need some audio.
Just tell me how to say the words. I
I
know
love
I have like somewhere I have the complete Jewish Bible, and there's a lot of words that I would need that Strong's guy to come back on again.
Nice. All right. So talking about knowledge, we wrapped up with moral excellence. So we kind of started at this point, just very brief backup to we talked about diligence. This is a process that's going to take work. It's going to take time. It's not something that we can lean into our era of instant gratification on. At giving all diligence, add to your faith. Sorry, I'm going to quote King James because that's where I have this one memorized. Add to your faith, which is the foundation of all things. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. We are saved by grace through faith. You're going to add to your faith moral excellence or virtue. And so that's this high standard, a moral standard, a standard of excellence. And then after you've implemented that standard in your life, you're going to come to this knowledge. So, Jordan, unless you specifically want to start this, I'm going to let Steven kick it off with what he was kind of talking about before.
Oh, Stephen. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I was looking through this, I'm not a Greek expert. My knowledge basically just comes from kind of the Blue Letter Bible, what I can learn from there, an article here and there. And so sometimes it really helps me to understand what a word means and how it's being used by looking at the way in which it's translated or what English word came from what Greek word. And so in getting into that, I discovered that this passage actually uses three different words that are translated know or knowledge. The blue here is epignosis. All the yellow ones are gnosis. And then the green is ido. And so studying through this a little bit, and again, I'm sure there are people who would mincemeat my explanation, but gnosis and epignosis are almost on a sliding scale. If you're talking about 0 or 100, ido is very binary. You know it or you don't. So you can know that my shirt is black once you've seen it. You didn't know, now you know 100%. These two, however, are the gnosis being kind of the beginning of experiential knowledge, things that you learn over time or through relationship or that kind of thing. Epignosis being much further along in that. And so you see in the highlight where Peter wants us to start is with this beginning relational knowledge. And then it's transformative as it becomes deeper and fuller. And there are a few times, again, throughout the New Testament where Ido is used in this relational way to convey this idea of a full, complete knowing. So 100% in a way that we don't tend to really master well, but that's definitely the goal. That would be the fullness of knowledge with Christ.
Awesome. I love that you talked about, the gnosis being that, the yellow word, of course, which is what he says, add to your moral excellence, this gnosis, being the beginning, like the start of this journey. And it specifically with knowledge being used, to me, that this pulls out the proverb, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And I don't know if we want to dive into that or not, or what other thoughts you guys have, but I do think it is important. We recently had Rick Burgess from the Rick and Bubba show at our church, and he was talking about when his dad was a coach. Now, so he's from Alabama. I lived in Alabama for a couple years in the Oxford Anniston area, and just about 30-ish, maybe minutes north of Anniston is Jackson State College, or well, whatever that college is. It's Jackson something. And Rick's dad got asked to coach there. Well, he had been a football coach for high school, so he was at an interview, and he said, they said, "What's your coaching philosophy? Like, how's it going to change?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, this isn't like, small town. Everybody knows who you are. You can just do whatever you want." He goes, "This is college. You got to have a plan." And he said something to the effect of, "If you don't fear me, I can't teach you."
Mm.
And Rick said, Coach didn't know, but he had some good theology right there, because it's the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And he said there used to be a compliment we used to pay somebody. It said, "That's a God-fearing man." And I think we've gotten away from that concept of what does it mean to fear God, and that being the beginning of this knowledge. Jordan, being the elder in the group, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, fear is um, the fear of the Lord. Fear is usually means awe.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to be terrified of. It means to be in awe. It's more like respect than it is. We think of fear as being scared.
Yeah.
Where fear of the Lord it's supposed to be a sense of awe and reverence.
I always think of it's Isaiah 6 when someone talks about the fear of the Lord. When he said, the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. He talks about the angels crying, holy, holy, holy. And that image struck such, I would say, fear or awe, reverence in Isaiah that he said, woe is me. That kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think of the first line of the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. That's fear.
Yeah.
That's awe. Hallowed be your name. That's showing awe,
Yeah.
showing fear. I think that's how it's meant.
There really ought to be, if you walk into the throne room of a king, there ought to be a fear and an awe and a reverence from the get-go because
Yeah.
of the power that person has, the authority that person has, their right place in it. And I think that, where we err now further down the line is we can get what we would describe as being too familiar.
Yeah.
So I might walk into the throne room and be like, hey, buddy, what's up?
Yeah.
That guy's still a king. He may be my friend. I may know him well. I was good friends with the pastor at one of our previous churches, and I usually called him by just his first name. And then one day I did that while I was doing announcements from the pulpit, and he just very gently, afterwards said, "Hey, there's a lot of folks here that are very, you know, formal on things, and so when you're up there and you talk about me or speak to me or whatever, please call me Pastor so and so." And it was that realization, and I made sure to do it every time after that because it wasn't that he needed that, but that the right place and the right respect that came with what he was doing and the role I was filling at that time.
Yeah.
So not to take that for granted and not to ever come to the Lord again and say, hey, we're buddies. I know you better now. I understand you better. I understand grace that you're forgiving, and so we're cool, right? No, there is still a calling to serve the King in reverence and awe, but he is a very, very good King.
Well, you think about First Peter, First Peter says, because God is holy, we should be holy in our behavior, for it's written, be holy, for he is holy. So there's still, like you said, this awe that's there. We are the sons of the King. We're children of the King. We are saved. We can come boldly before the throne of grace. He is our Father, and we are joint heirs with Christ. But at the same time, he is all of divinity, and we are flesh. And I think it's so easy to forget that. And especially, my background in legalism, you come from legalism and it's all about fear of the Lord. And so the natural tendency is to pendulum way over and like, oh yeah, he's my father, he's my friend. And it's like, no, no, no. Let's bring it back to this middle ground of, I have a healthy respect of my father. Now, my dad is shorter than me. I'm pretty sure he weighs less than I do now. So there's not a whole lot of awe there. But when I was a teenager, I was about that big around, and my dad had a good 40 pounds on me, and dad played football and wrestled. And to be honest, dad could still probably take me on just because he has the knowledge, right, of how to subdue a person, how to do it being smaller than someone. I mean, he was 5'6", 5'4" to 5'6", 110 pounds playing tackle football. So, and my school didn't have tackle football, so I don't know all these techniques that he does. So I fully recognize it on any given day. He could probably take me in a good grappling match, but I don't live in the fearful awe that I used to. But as a teenager, I definitely did.
Yeah.
I watched my dad take on guys that were bigger than him. I've seen him
Mhm.
do it. So for me, it's like, okay, but I also wasn't scared to be around him, right?
Yes.
I knew
Yeah.
that there was a comfort and a safety because of the love. I wasn't scared that if I did something wrong, I was going to lose my life, but I also sought to please him. And I think we have to have that balance of that relational knowledge, which is what this is coming to.
Yeah.
We're setting that high standard, right? We've come to him by faith, we've received salvation by grace, we're growing in faith, we've added this moral excellence, but now we're going to build on that from the standard of moral excellence and starting with the awe and coming to the comfort and the boldness without losing the wonder, right? I think
Yeah.
David said it so well when he said, restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, because we forget sometimes the wonder and the pure joy of that relief when we're first saved, right? When that
Yeah.
burden rolls and we realize that we are free and we are loved, we've been accepted in him, and it is wonderful and it's amazing. And there's a sense of childlike wonder and awe. We keep coming back to that word, but I think it's a really good description.
Yeah. There are in every, person A to person B, there are formal and familiar relationships, and there are levels of those, but we really need to embrace the formal ones in order to be able to access the familiar ones. The where I learned this was in my interactions with my mom as I got older and started to become more of a friend to her.
Mhm.
Um, and was still living in her house and still had responsibilities, and having her kind of clarify to me gently that I don't get to kind of access that friendship side of things if I haven't fulfilled the son slash tenant responsibilities, of being the person who lives in the house and has things that I have to do. Similar example here, you and I are friends, and I might make fun of you for saying something wrong.
Like not
But
remembering it.
here, yeah, here I'm a guest on your podcast.
Yeah.
And so that is our formal relationship that I would need to respect and not try to access our familiar one in a way that's disruptive to what we were formally doing here. And so we have to have that with God, that closeness as sons is a familiar relationship by definition, but one that we access through bowing at his feet as kings. That concept of like sitting in the back of the wedding to be brought forward,
Yeah.
not sitting up front saying, "Yeah, I get to be here."
I like that. Look at you throwing out parables.
Sipping the Lord's tea.
Yes. Jordan, more thoughts on knowledge?
No, I thought Stephen did a great job.
It was really good. All right. Well, if there's no further thoughts, I think we're just going to move right on to self-control.
You want me
Uh,
to keep this up or pull it down?
let's leave it up for 1 second. And if you could highlight verse 6 for me, be to your right there. Yep. Perfect. So this is where we're moving
Make it a
into.
color.
So after we've done knowledge, we're going to move from knowledge to your, and in your knowledge, add self-control, and in your self-control, perseverance. And that'll kind of be our goal for the night. So you can go ahead and pull that down. I've asked Jordan to read an excerpt from Mere Christianity. Um, I feel like I've quoted Mere Christianity quite a bit recently. We're doing an apologetics class at church. And then, of course, just in our general teaching on Sundays and things, the several quotes have come up. But self-control, I did this series, part of it, during COVID over Zoom, kind of like this, with some just young married couples, right? My wife and I were young and married. My sister had recently got married. We had a couple other friends that joined in. Of course, we're all quarantined. And of course, I took these one at a time and it was insane, but got through self-control. And it really was so almost sad because one of the young ladies who grew up in it was similar, but not the same background I did, looked at me and said, "That is the first time I've ever heard self-control taught." And she was in her 20s and not had premarital sex be the entirety of the context.
Mm,
She grew up in church, I think her dad might have been a deacon, um, in her 20s, grew up in church, and had never heard self-control taught outside of sexual purity.
wow.
And of course, the translation I grew up with the King James calls it temperance, which is really what brings us to the quote from C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity, because he really does a awesome job addressing this. So Jordan, if you wouldn't mind kicking off self-control and bring us the wisdom of Mr. Lewis.
Yeah, here's C.S. Lewis. It's one of the cardinal virtues. Temperance is, unfortunately, one of those words that has changed its meaning. It now usually means teetotalism. But in the days when the second cardinal virtue was Christian temperance, it meant nothing of the sort. Temperance referred not specially to drink, but to all pleasures. And it meant not abstaining, but going the right length and no further. It is a mistake to think that Christians ought all to be teetotalers. Mohammedanism, not Christianity, is the teetotal religion. Of course, it may be the duty of a particular Christian or of any Christian at a particular time to abstain from strong drink, either because he is the sort of man who cannot drink at all without drinking too much, or because he is with people who are inclined to drunkenness and must not encourage them by drinking himself. But the whole point is that he is abstaining for a good reason from something which he does not condemn and which he likes to see other people enjoying. One of the marks of a certain type of bad man is that he cannot give up a thing himself without wanting everyone else to give it up. That is not the Christian way. An individual Christian may see fit to give up all sorts of things for special reasons, marriage or meat or beer or the cinema. But the moment he starts saying the things are bad in themselves, or looking down his nose at other people who do use them, he has taken the wrong turning. One great piece of mischief has been done by the modern restriction of the word temperance to the question of drink. It helps people to forget that you can be just as intemperate about lots of other things. A man who makes his golf or his motorcycle the center of his life, or a woman who devotes all her thoughts to clothes or bridge or her dog, is being just as intemperate as someone who gets drunk every evening. Of course, it does not show on the outside so easily. Bridge mania or golf mania do not make you fall down in the middle of the road, but God is not deceived by externals.
Does anyone know what bridge is? I know it's a game.
Yeah,
It's a card game. I mean, I used to have it like in the newspaper, there'd be like a section that was like bridge tips or whatever, but yeah, it's definitely not one I have ever played.
It's kind of like euchre. There's a lot more cards, and you have a partner, and for some reason, the partner of the person that bids doesn't play while the hand is being played. Something like that.
Interesting.
It's a whole bidding. It's complicated. My parents used to play it, so I watched. I was in the room watching them playing, and I was just going, I have no idea what's going on. But it's a lot of cards, a lot of rules. Yeah.
Complete sidetrack, but
yeah.
I love that so much. What he said though, and Jordan, you highlighted as soon as I brought this up, you said about knowing knowing how far, or it's not going, but knowing how far to go, or something like that.
Yeah, I closed the book after I read it. Just a second.
Sorry. Yeah, I've got mine open.
I actually was kind of encouraged by that quote because we're trying to do keto, and I know that like for me, I got to stop eating certain things in order to be on that, but I don't make everyone else stop eating the things that I stop eating because I'm the one on a diet.
Yeah.
I do that just because I guess I'm not a horrible person. But reading that, I was like, oh, C.S. Lewis would be so proud of me.
It means going the right length and no further.
There you go. Right length and no further. Um, and that this applies to so many areas of our lives, right? We're told be angry and sin not. And in the exact same chapter, the Bible says, let all anger and wrath pass from you. And they are two different Greek words. But there comes a point in so many things in life where you can go too far. Okay. Um,
Mhm.
I grew up in a culture that idolized the 50s era and 60s, and particularly the Leave It to Beavers side of that, not the
Yeah.
Cardinals. And with that, John Wayne was pepped up as this man. That is the image of a man, right? You walk tall. If you were by nature a small person, you were just deemed less manly, right? That means I had issues. You never apologize, never let people see you cry, all of that type stuff. And it stems from this era of war and toughness and ranchers. And honestly, there's nothing emasculine about crying. Okay. We see Jesus cry. We see Paul wept emotionally over the Ephesians in, I think it's Acts, is it 19? Um, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what's happened is we've said, oh, well, my dad beat me for crying, so crying must be wrong. So therefore, we take the whole thing away rather than saying, well, and now men have become emotionless. We joke. I mean, my wife jokes that I'm a robot. Will Hess has been known to joke that he's an emotional robot, right? And we find these times in our lives where we experience emotion and honestly don't know how to handle it because it's somewhat overwhelming rather than
Yeah.
saying, let's experience the emotions that God gave us, but not be controlled by them. Let's enjoy what God gave us to enjoy, but also understand that everything in moderation, nothing in excess, right? Control the things, you know, don't be drunk with wine where it is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. That doesn't mean don't drink. It means don't be drunk. Let's not.
Yeah.
And this goes to everything. Too much sleep, too much eating is gluttony. Too much. Why did I have to bring up gluttony? I like cookies, and Ava's been selling them, and that means I've been eating them, and it's not good. Um, Too much of good things. Too much gym time. Like there are guys that their time at the gym has become their identity, and anytime that something becomes out of balance in life, and actually I there was a really good book, I think it's called Gospel Treason is the one that I think I'm remembering. This guy, it was really interesting, was a young married minister, and he actually began to resent his family because he felt that they were a hindrance to his ministry, and he said I wanted to be like the older single ministers whose wives had died because they could commit all of their time to ministry. And then God basically smacked him upside the head and said, no, your family is your ministry. And for you to be like those men would be wrong. And it would be a lack of self-control. He needed to set aside that time for ministry. And you can look across several denominations and hear story after story after story of men who said, I'm not going to take care of my family. If I take care of my ministry, God will take care of my family. But that's actually the opposite of the requirements of a minister, right?
Yeah.
Minister's supposed to have his house in order. So, what are your guys' thoughts? I ranted.
I've seen people who didn't realize that in time.
Yeah.
And, the dad dedicated himself to ministry. And, you see the younger kids were brought along after he had kind of figured that out. And they are close to them and close to the Lord. And then you may have the older ones that struggled or that walked away or that kind of thing. I've seen that in real life. And I think, we as a couple have done a lot of trying to see where the Lord was moving in us, knock on doors and see where the Lord opens. So there's a lot of,
Interjection. He
questions.
means him and his wife, not he and I as a couple.
Yeah. Jeremy and I, no. So my wife and I we've done, it's kind of been our mindset of like, we knock on a door and see if the Lord opens it. And if so, then we kind of move that direction. And so there's a lot of these questions of what am I supposed to do for the Lord? Am I supposed to go to this place? Am I supposed to sign up for this thing? Um, it took us a little bit, not terribly long, thankfully, to realize that there is one absolute yes that the Lord has very clearly placed in front of us, or well, 8 absolute yeses that the Lord has clearly placed in front of us that are our responsibilities and they are our primary ministry. And so when other things get in the way of that, those other things get cut.
Yep.
Which you guys have seen that, we've seen that in the sense that like there are reasons that we haven't made this call
Yeah.
because it has been detrimental to family time.
Yep.
And you guys have filled it out for the same reason at different times.
Yep.
But it's that understanding that that is the one certainty that the Lord has put in front of you. Those are the ones God has put in your hands. Everyone else is a maybe.
Yeah.
But those ones, yes, absolutely yes.
And I love, kind of going back through this. Paul says all things are lawful, not all things are expedient, healthy, right? So this goes back to that knowledge. Okay. There is freedom to do just about anything in Christ. Okay.
Mhm.
But not all things are healthy for me. Now, what might be okay for me may not be healthy for Stephen. And what might be healthy for both Stephen and I might not be healthy for Jordan. And this is another thing that C.S. Lewis got on, was by saying that because something is unhealthy for me means that no one else can partake. Okay. So if I struggle, I know that if I start drinking, now maybe I've never had an alcoholism problem, but if I start drinking, I'll go too far. Okay. I need to abstain, but that doesn't mean that I have to require Jordan and Stephen to abstain, right? I know my vices. That knowledge comes from relationship with God, from living, from seeing my own failures. Now, thankfully, alcohol has never been a problem for me. But I do have vices. I do have issues. I have a severe sweet tooth. And my wife got onto me the other day because I ate too many cookies in one night. I didn't feel bad, but I complained the next day when I stepped on the scale at work and I was like, hey, I'm up a little bit. She goes, yeah, you ate 4 chocolate chip cookies. Maybe exercise some self-control. And
Was it
I'm
the one
like,
on the loading dock, like the freight scale?
Only
How many
4?
cookies was it?
it was 4.
4 is
It was
4 is
4.
like what I.
This is
my
being recorded,
starting-
so he has to give the official number that he reported on.
Oh boy.
It
When
was
my wife
4.
makes
Literally
chocolate chip
cooking the
cookies.
books.
Look,
Yeah,
it
4
was
is the
4
starting plate.
It was 4 in the middle of the night. 4 was my midnight snack.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
So
like, did you speed the whole way home? No, I didn't speed the whole way home. I stopped at a red light.
that's right.
Yeah.
I was not speeding while I was slowing down.
Yeah.
But so as we go through life, and I think Lewis even said the mature person is the one who can know his vices, say, I can't have that, but I'm thankful that you can. And I can I don't want to almost say enjoy it through your eyes, but I can be glad that you can enjoy something that I can't. And I think that shows incredible maturity and freedom in Christ to say, look, I can't partake of something. I would love to, but it's not good for me. Actually, it's kind of funny. There was a rabbi who told a story about a guy who was walking with his son in LA. True story. The rabbi was previously an alcoholic and had stopped drinking. And they were walking down the street and they came across a homeless drunk and he's got vomit and all that. And the boy goes, who would ever want to be like that? And the father said, son, I envy that man. He's like, at least he gets to drink. And so often we live our lives with the whole not causing your brother to stumble. And we live in fear of doing that. But I think the command is don't intentionally do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
there's 2 sides of it. If you're so that concept of eating meat offered to idols, Paul is very, very clear on how both sides are to walk in that.
Yeah.
If I feel the freedom to eat meat offered to idols, but you don't, I'm not going to throw it in your face. But I'm also like, if I don't know and I offer you meat and you come into my house to eat dinner, don't ask.
Yeah.
Don't bring up your conviction to try and make sure you're not, and you're throwing your burden onto me.
Yep.
Actually, the one that is carrying that burden is the weaker brother, which dovetails into kind of what this whole passage is about, is that maturity in Christ is not about laws, rules, setting all these things up. You and I talked about that on our chat this week,
Yep.
how Adam is clearly like wanting to or considering, eating from the tree that he's not supposed to. And so that's why he adds something to the law that was given to him.
Yep.
And it was that addition that allowed the enemy to undercut God's law. Same thing happens with the Pharisees. They are adding things to the law. Same thing happens in the culture that you and I grew up in, this idea of like, why do we not have an epidemic of young people in the church joyriding in cars before they're 16? Because we are very clear that driving a car is a good but dangerous thing that is to be done at a right time and not before.
Yeah.
Whereas all we tell them about sex is bad,
Yeah.
bad. And so they go and they experience that. Now, that's not what the Lord has said about it.
Even more so, we talk about how wonderful it is and how enticing women are and all of the physical sensual stuff, and we really glorify sex and then talk about how they can't have it. And if they have
Yeah.
it soon, they're just the worst person on earth. And everything becomes out of proportion. Jordan, you look like you're about to say something.
No, I was just laughing at that. Yeah.
Yeah, the holiness doesn't come from these
That's-
rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you tell somebody, you know, like with alcohol, you can't even have a sip. It just makes you want it more.
Yeah.
Rather than promoting and saying, hey, you know what?
Yeah,
Whoever
there's the right
sees
time.
thereby is not wise, but there is a healthy way to do this. There's a safe way to do this. So don't be deceived. Let's have some knowledge. Let's learn.
Mhm.
I'm on staff at a church where I'm not supposed to do that anymore. But I used to drink, right? And thoroughly enjoyed it. But before I ever had my first sip, I did a lot of study on what different types of alcohol do to the body. Um, I had some rules in place. Sarah and I had established 3 rules about it to keep it from becoming a problem. Now there were still a few things that happened. There was one time that I drank on an empty stomach and did not realize, and I didn't drink any more than I ever had before.
Mhm.
But because I had an empty stomach, it hit me quite a bit differently. And I learned very quickly, okay, don't do that again. So you learn through experience, you learn through study. But I can say that I drank for 8 years casually and never had a problem. Now, I'm not saying that I am the epitome and pinnacle of, the right way to do things. There are people that I would say should not touch alcohol. There are things that I know in my life are not what my dad would call still waters. Psalm 23, he leads us beside the still waters. Alcohol has not been a problem, and I have always been cautious of that. I don't take that for granted because I do know people who do struggle very, very heavily with it. But I know my own personal vices. My wife is aware of my vices, and I have some friends who are aware of my vices. And I know they can go and watch things and be around things and see things that I can't. It's not
Mhm.
healthy for me. So, and I'm happy that they have the freedom to do that and it doesn't affect their walk with Christ. There are things that I'm like, I don't know that that's a sin, but it's not healthy and I need to stay away. So,
Yeah.
but that's me. And if someone can partake in those things and it doesn't affect their walk with Christ, then I think that's awesome. I think that
Yeah.
they have they have a great freedom there that I don't have. And I think part of that comes back to what Paul said about, the thorn in the flesh. There are just things that are designed, one, for our safety, but two, for our own humility to say, you know what?
Mhm.
I don't have to be able to do everything.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a freedom in kind of knowing where you walk and then walking on the holier side of it. Not, again, not for religious purposes, but when you are pursuing Christ actively, there is not that, oops, did I go too far in the other direction?
Yeah.
Um, Side story, and feel free to cut it out in the final version if you don't like it. But
I haven't done that yet, so
yeah. So you're talking about self-control. When I was much younger, I used to play racquetball with a group of guys from our church on a regular basis. And we went to the apartment complex racquetball court that one of the guys, where he lived. And as we're walking in, these two young guys were walking out, and they had a very distinct smell that I now am more familiar with, not because I partake of the devil's lettuce, but just because I've smelled it enough times. So we get into the racquetball court and we can smell it. And we're like, okay, they were in here, lighting it up, but not like we were about to light it up. Yeah, so we played, but not considering the fact that this was an enclosed room with no ventilation while we were exerting ourselves, none of us having any tolerance for the ganja because we'd never done it. Of course, because we were so holy. So like it hit us pretty effectively to the point where like someone just misses the ball and we're like laying on the floor laughing about it. I'm sure anyone who regularly, like smokes weed or whatever is just would crack up at that story because of how pathetic it is. But we just had no tolerance
I've
for it.
never done weed, and I'm cracking up at the story.
Yeah. But like it was that experience of watching myself laughing at things that weren't that funny. Like when someone runs face first into the glass, like let's all just roll on the floor and that's hilarious. But when someone just kind of falls down a little bit and we're just like laughing, and I'm watching this me laugh at things that really aren't that funny, while the kind of cognizant me is back here going, I don't like this.
Yeah.
This is not what should actually be happening.
Yeah.
That separation of self-control was something I did not enjoy.
Yeah.
And so that's why I've never even like, I might have some wine, but never to the point where I'm to that stage because I don't like that. That means if I'm ever a jerk to you, it was on purpose and I apologize. But
Or not,
yeah. But it's just that so you look at like then the idea of being slain in the spirit. That to me flies in the face of this whole idea that the work of the spirit in you is self-control.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are people who would make a very, very good case for that kind of thing. But I feel like it's polar opposites to what's being said here in Galatians 5, that kind of thing.
And for the record, I am not a cessationist, but I fully agree with you. I don't think tongues is what the Pentecostals are claiming it is. Personally.
Yeah. I only know earthly languages, but it doesn't work in any earthly language kind of box. It could be a higher language, but it seems lower.
Don't you?
Like everything I've heard is much, much, much more basic.
Yeah.
Than a functional language.
James, so.
Do what?
Tongues is actually just the King James.
I saw a guy one time talking about he wanted to go into like a Pentecostal church and just recite the Lord's Prayer in Latin and then wait for someone to interpret. And I was like, I want to see that video because that
would be cool.
Yeah.
Jordan, what are your thoughts on all this? You've been listening to us ramble and be immature, so.
Yeah, no, it's good. You're talking about, different things. Like, for example, I've got this, I love this Bacanora. Tastes delicious. And
is that water? Is that your bottle of water?
Yeah. I've had this for months. It sits on my shelf and I have no need to partake of that. But if I had a Toblerone candy bar sitting on the shelf behind me, I'd be sitting here and just thinking about how quick we can get this over so I can eat that candy bar.
My lack of self-control is exhibited in the bookshelf.
I have no self-control with candy. I have to not buy it.
Yeah.
If I buy it and bring it home and I take a bite, I just can't stop. I just eat the whole bar. So that's my That's the thing that I have to stay away from and have
Mm.
self-control over. So I can understand a little bit, about people that they take one drink and then they can't stop, because that's how I feel with a candy bar, man. I take one bite and I'm like,
Yeah.
I can shit.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter how big it is or how many there are. I'll
I
eat the whole
could
thing.
honestly, if Snickers contained all of the things that were needed for like to survive, I could live on a Snickers.
There was a guy that hiked the Appalachian
Oh,
Trail,
Adams.
and he supposedly did like the whole thing just on Snicker bars.
That's
That's all he did was buy
Wow.
Snickers bars.
he might be
It's
my hero.
crazy, isn't it?
That's amazing.
I do struggle with self-control in different ways here and there, but if you're talking about like your particular kryptonite, Jordan, I feel like mine, and I realize how absurd this is to say, is like making a joke regardless of the circumstances. Like that's where I struggle the most because it's like you're talking about something and I'm like, I want to make a funny comment on that. And it doesn't matter if it's the right time for it or not. You were talking about like your dad being, you're bigger than him now, and so he's like I'm probably smaller, or my dad's probably smaller than me, and I was like, I've been bigger than my dad, since he was cremated, so I don't worry about that anymore. But I let you finish what you were talking about because I didn't want to interrupt your meaningful story. I was practicing self-control.
You did very good, and you waited
Thank
until
you.
the right time. I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
Something popped up on Facebook the other day, and it said, "Name that one friend that you can't sit by at any serious event." And so I showed my wife, and I was like, this has really turned into our college pastor because he's become a really good friend, and we do a lot of work together, and your dad because was sitting by him at church frequently, and well, first I said Bo, the college pastor, and it's like your dad's kind of that way too, and I looked at her, she looked at me, and she said, Jeremy, you're that person to pretty much everyone. You just
Oh
stop.
When
man.
I'm sitting by
Thanks.
him, and when I'm sitting by him, he's like that. When I'm sitting by him, he's like that.
Yeah, I know. It's like the guy that went to the doctor and he's like, Doc, I'm broken. He goes, everywhere I touch it hurts. Like, ow, ow,
Yeah.
ow. He goes, your finger's broken, you idiot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about like that.
All right.
I am gonna actually redirect us. I know you were about to redirect us too, but I'm gonna do it. So
Okay.
I was looking at the usages of that word that's used, and I'm not gonna try to pronounce it, but that word that Peter uses for self-control. And it's only in there 3 times. And twice once it's the fruit of the Spirit,
Yep.
once it's Peter here. But the other times, very interesting, Felix invites Paul to speak about Jesus. And like we don't even know a whole lot about what Paul says, but it says, as he was discussing righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix became frightened and said, go away for the present. When I find time, I will summon you. Like it's just righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come were enough to like terrify Felix, where he's like, get out of here. I know that, self-control was not one of the big things in Roman culture. But to me, it's just a very interesting that it's like those few things were enough for him to say, "Get out of here. I'm done." I don't know. That's all I had on that.
That's really interesting, actually, because you think about the power of someone. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, but when you see someone who's angry, like truly, like they are ticked off, and you can see that they are in complete control, right? That's scarier than someone who's just mad and throwing fists. Like when
Yeah.
someone can channel and they can focus that anger and channel it, like that's to me, that's 100 times scarier. And especially when you talk about the Romans not having that culture of self-control, and here comes Paul talking about it, and I could see when you talk about a god, when you worship gods who encourage you to give into every compulsion, right? What then happens when you're addicted is you are controlled by those addictions and you have no control. So then when you're preaching about a God who saves you, gives you righteousness, and then gives you the power to control yourself over your own vices. I mean, that is kind of a scary thing. Like that,
Yeah.
that's to me, that would be intimidating if I was coming from his culture. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really, really good sidebar. And on that note, we're going to move from, yeah, I'm not going to try to pronounce that either, to perseverance, which is the Greek word that appears to look like hypomone. Hypomone? No, that's a long E. Anyway, patience, perseverance, long suffering are other ways that this is translated. They feel like Jordan's had to use a lot of self-control and perseverance with us tonight.
Yeah. He has suffered long.
Let me ask you guys this. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear of perseverance? Or long suffering or any of these?
Well, so the patience one, to me, going back to James, let patience have her perfect work.
Yeah.
Knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience and endurance, having its perfect result, like this idea that, we talked about the diligence, we talked about the ongoingness of all of this, long suffering and enduring over time. Um, it is interesting that self-control comes before patience and before long suffering. But yeah, my first thought goes right to that passage from James chapter 1.
That's the same for me. Jordan, what would normally be your first if you hear like patience, long suffering, all of that?
Oh boy. I don't know. Not really sure what to say about it.
Now I'll say this. Going through this study helped me realize one thing. My parents did not understand the English language because when I wanted to open Christmas presents, they'd say, be patient. And what they really should have said is have some self-control, be temperate.
Mm,
Because really patience is not about this, well, give me 5 minutes, or hey, I know we're on a long car ride, but be patient, we'll get there. No, that's have self-control. Endurance really seems to specify that this long, drawn out, it's self-control, trust in God, especially when you talk about count it all joy when you fall into various temptations and testings, because the testing of your faith works patience. Well, that testing takes time. This isn't going to be a overnight or a couple hour thing. I realize I haven't told you all this. So I'm going through something right now. Over the past month or so, month and a half, I've had 4 blood draws. So I initially went in to get my blood drawn because have had cholesterol problems in the past and I'm switching PCPs. And so got that done. And she goes, well, your cholesterol looks fine, but it looks like your kidney has a little bit of decreased functionality. So she goes, let's test again in a week. And I said, okay. I said, by the way, I've been taking such and such supplements. And she goes, okay, let's not do that one for a week. I said, okay. Oh, no. I take that back. Did the second blood test. And she goes, it looks worse. So that's when we discussed my supplements. And she goes, well, stay off that one. Did a third blood draw a week later. And she goes, well, it looks a little better, but not really much. Let's do and did a urinalysis at the same time. And then she said, let's do a fourth one in 2 weeks just to really see. So about a week ago, I got my 4th blood draw done. And she basically said my kidney function has stabilized, but not normalized. So now I have to go see a kidney specialist.
mm.
Well, I got that call and they said, yeah, the soonest we can get you in is January 21st. And I told my wife, I'm like, I don't know how to process all this because 1, I want to know. 2, it just feels weird to say my kidneys aren't working. But now I have to go through the next 2.5 months without knowing, right? That is a trying of my faith because I have to rely on God. 1, that my kidneys aren't going to get worse because I'm not getting any more blood draws till that happens. 2, I've got to make sure my family stays healthy and happy. 3, we've got all the holidays and all the fun times. And in the back of my mind is this whole situation of not knowing. Now, thankfully, they've ruled out diabetes, and they have like the likelihood of cancer is incredibly low. But then again, that it's almost like catch 22. Would I almost rather them say it was one of those, because that's easy to identify and we could get on the treatment, versus now I have to go to a specialist. So, there's this trial, but there's no end in sight to this, right? This was not another quick blood draw. Oh yeah, you're dehydrated, or you've got a little too much this going on. No, now I have to go see a second doctor. I have to wait 2.5 months for that. That doctor is going to take their time, I'm sure, before finding any kind of thing. And there may be multiple tests. And then there's whatever treatment, if treatment's necessary. So there's this whole underlying stress as the provider of the home. And then I don't want to take that stress out on my kids. So there comes in the self. So now I've got knowledge, and now I have to have self-control, because there's going to be a long term where I have to be patient. I have to rely on God. I have to endure through this, because I need my children to have a somewhat normal life. I don't want them to be freaking out and see dad fall into a state of depression just because my kidney's functioning weird. And it's not emergent. It's barely off. It's just enough that the doctor was like, hey, let's follow up on this, right? Even I've looked at other numbers, and yeah, it could be not functioning, like it could be at 95% or something like that. It's just enough that she's like alarmed, but not urgently, which is again kind of weird to me. So that's just scenario in my life. And of course, I know you guys have faced things and gone through things, and you look back on things from junior high, right? And you're like, what I thought was a big trial, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I only knew. And I don't mean that to be discouraging to anyone younger, because I love the soul building theodicy, right? You go through things to teach you to handle more, to make you better, to make you stronger. Why? Because, as James said, when patience has its complete work, its perfect work, it will make you whole. And Stephen, I know you, and you do not have to share any of this, but I know you're going through quite a bit right now. And I can only imagine what it means to have to day in and day out face some of those things and be consistent and be in control. And to be in control of yourself when you can't be in control of the situation.
Yeah, it's and I'm not an expert. It's just, so we have a child that is got a lot of health issues, and they will more than likely result in a shorter lifespan. And so it's that kind of walking through that day to day, having to choose in every moment. I think self-control and a lot of these things pop up in moments. I think when you go back to applying all diligence, diligence is right choices over time. Self-control is a right choice in the moment against what you want to do. I think that perseverance, that long suffering, is self-control over time. So it's not just like, I'm being tortured, like someone's burning my hand for the next year.
Yeah.
But it is choosing rightly over the long haul in those. So when we are struggling with these things, it is in the patient endurance of choosing to focus on God, choosing to focus on the promise of his hope, that helps us see not just that he has the power to heal, but also that he has the power to help us endure. There are days that we get to the end of the day and it doesn't make sense that we even made it to the end of the day, but knowing that he has gotten us through that. And so I say this and I see and I know my own beam of flaws, but just to share for the knowledge and the growth of people who may listen and want to understand that concept. But early on, we had a lot of people praying these aggressive prayers like she's going to be healed, and we prayed for that and powerful prayers and all that kind of stuff. And that did not seem to be the Lord's will because it did not happen. And so eventually we kind of got to the point where people are coming to us and wanting to pray those kind of prayers, and we're like, okay, I'm never going to stop anybody from it. But there's that dip where you're tempted to kind of lose faith because God isn't doing those things. Um, but then remembering, how I try to walk in things is not to put God's name on things that he didn't claim. He didn't take credit for her sickness. He also did not promise that he was going to heal her bodily right now.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to try to hold him to account for that. But what I will hold him to account for and cling to is the promise that he will heal her in the next life.
Yeah.
And so my certainty of the promised hope has come through enduring in long suffering through the current trial. What I'm working on now and have not yet learned is how to trust in his ability to redeem.
Yeah.
So when I look and know that she will be fully restored in the next life, that's a good promise. But it doesn't necessarily make it easier to see the suffering now. So how is that okay? How is it not, God? Why are you not just taking this away? If I know you're going to do it, why are you not doing it now? And so what I am you enter into John 11 a little bit. Sorry to go all over the place, but you enter into John 11 a little bit because Jesus knows when he's standing with Mary and Martha at the tomb, they said, "Come and see the place where your friend is buried." And he's standing there with them, knowing what he's about to do, knowing that he's about to call down the power from heaven to bring this guy out back to life for God's glory, knowing the redemption is coming. He wept with them. And so I'm kind of in that place. I'm standing in that Jesus right there, right now. Um, I don't know what it's going to look like on the other side. How is he going to redeem this? How am I going to look back? And I'm not going to forget it. I don't think it's about like at some point he's going to take all this away and just pretend it never happened. That's not redemption.
Yeah.
That's absolution. That's wiping it away. I don't think that's what he's doing. He's going to redeem all this in a way that we're going to look back and go, it was good. I know that. And I think if I rest in that and I choose to believe that over time, that the Lord will grow in me in knowledge and understanding of what that looks like. I'm not there yet. I'm standing there watching the John 11 Jesus weep with those who are weeping, even though he knows what's about to happen. I'm not to that next phase yet. I want to be. I want to make sense of it, and I want it all to look reasonable, and I want to rest in his goodness in it. In that part of it.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet.
And this is I did the problem of evil in course in our class, and one of the things I talked about was the anti-theodicy that you always have to be careful giving answers to the problem of evil, right? 4 years ago, we had a miscarriage and almost lost Sarah. And there were so many times, of course, she spent like 3 or 4 weeks in recovery on the couch because she lost like 30 to 40% of her blood. That she said, I just don't know what good could come of this. Like, people miscarry all the time, but to hemorrhage the way she did on Christmas Day, Stephen, you'll remember it was the day of the AT&T bombing in Nashville. Like, so hospital communications were shut down. Like, everything that could go wrong, it seemed like, was going wrong. And so in the weeks following, she just said, I know someday we'll know this, but I don't even know if we'll ever know on this earth. And it's so amazing how 4 years later, and it didn't even take this long, but 4 years later, in fact, in a little over a month, it will be 4 years to the day, I can look back and see how my life is drastically different in the most amazing ways. My exposure to just even things like the church split. I had pushed Will's podcast, I had advertised, but I had never watched a single episode. But because my wife was forced to spend time on the couch and find new ways to fill her time, she decided to look up the church split, which led her to the RFP, which gave her insight to my background, which forced her to say, hey, you need to watch this podcast or listen to it. And I said, podcast is just modern talk radio. It's what old people do. And then and I checked out one episode because that's what she said to do. And I was hooked. And then I caught up on them and I decided to listen to Will's podcast. And I got into apologetics. And then I got into hermeneutics. And then I got into the Torah class and continued with the apologetics stuff. And before I knew it, here I am. And I'm, Jordan and I and Stephen, we're all in various theology groups on social media and engaged with all kinds of different groups. And I found out that Christianity was much bigger than I had ever thought possible. That the scope of what you can be as a Christian and still be considered a Christian was huge. That, there really is a concept of a mere Christianity. Like this is the basics, right? And heck, I found out that C.S. Lewis wrote more than Narnia. I had no clue who this guy was. All I knew was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and To the Last Battle, or sorry, The Magician's Nephew, To the Last Battle. I had no clue about any of his other work, and now he's one of my favorite theologians. And that all started because I was perfectly content where I was as a Christian. I thought I had a deep faith. I was going to a good church and studying the word and leading my family. And I had no clue how shallow my faith really was, but it took that valley. And God it was like I was standing over the well and God just ripped the shelf out from under me and I just started falling and I realized just how deep this could go. And I look back at that trial, that time as a blessing. Was it easy? No. Was it scary? Yeah. There is, I don't want to say nothing scarier. I would say I don't know that I have faced anything scarier than my 2-year-old waking up while my wife is screaming in the bathroom. And I can't be there for one of them on Christmas Day. And my dad lived 5 minutes away. I texted him, I said, 911, I need you now. And he and my mom came over. Dad got us in the car, went to the local clinic, the ER set up, and thankfully he knew one of the nurses that was working and was going to take care of it. He said, she's good. And he knew we were okay at that point. It was the worst day of my life, but it has resulted in so much growth in my relationship with God. It's been absolutely 100% transformative. I would say I am who I was before is simply a shadow of who I am today. And I grew up in the church. I mean, I was the PK. I was the MVP of Bible baseball, all of that type stuff. And
all the head knowledge, yeah.
Yeah. And God took all that gnosis and turned it into epignosis. He said, but now you're going to know. And he ripped the rug out from under, and it was just like he said, here's really how deep and how majestic and powerful I am. And I'm going to step into your tragedy and I'm going to transform you into a person you're not even going to recognize for the better. And this is not, Stephen, to say long for that or cherish or anything. I don't even know that I'm trying to say anything other than, while I can't imagine what you're dealing with on a day in, day out basis, I lived in a time where I couldn't see a good from that tragedy. And now I look back and see wonderful things. So the fact that you're already seeing and saying, I know he's going to redeem this. I know he's going to do something wonderful. But this is where I'm at is I think you're already further than I was on when I was in my valley. But
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that God is always working to bring good out of evil.
yeah,
That doesn't mean that the evil is coming from God.
yeah,
And a lot of, like, it's your response to what happened that has brought the good.
yeah,
So, in Pure Landra, Lewis says that, God didn't want Eve to fall. He doesn't want evil to take place, because some people experience evil and nothing good ever comes from it.
yeah,
Nothing good ever comes to them. So it's not like God's willing the evil so he can bring good out of it. It's that this evil happens and God is always working to bring good out of evil. So
yeah.
if you're faithful and have self-control and persevere, then that's where the good can come from it.
What was it? Romans 8:28 in the James White and Tim Barber debate. He said that in the Greek, we always read it that all things work together for good to those that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. But he said it can also legitimately, like, this isn't twisting the Greek, but from the Greek be worded something as God is working. I can't remember. I don't know if you remember this or not, but it words it a lot more as God is working with us for the good.
Yeah, it says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose.
Yeah.
So, this Romans 8, what Paul is talking about there is he wants to go on a missionary journey to Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And he's asking the Romans to fund his journey. It's like, this is what this is about. And it's about, he's writing to the Jews and the Greeks and telling them that they're all one in the new covenant. That's why he says that, all those that are born of Israel aren't Israel. People that are the Israel is whoever believes. If you, as Paul says, if you believe on the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and that, God is raised from the dead, you will be saved. That makes you Israel.
Yeah.
So we are Israel. All believers are Israel. So, Romans 3 says all Jews and Greeks have sinned. He goes to Adam to show that while the Jews look to Abraham as their father, and that's where their salvation comes, that everybody, Jew and Greek, comes from Adam. That's what he's saying about all have sinned. You're all in the same, playing field. And then, Romans 8, what shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Who will bring a charge against those who God has chosen? It's God who justifies. He's encouraging them that they're all in the new covenant, both Jew and Greek. Yep. It's just weird to pull this out and make it into this logical election thing, where most people aren't called, when, what is it, Acts? Well, I'm going to forget the chapter and the reference, but he says, the times of ignorance God overlooked. Now God commands all men everywhere, to be saved. Well, if God's decreeing all men everywhere and everything happens as God decrees, then everybody's saved. But James White doesn't take that verse and apply that Western logical, linear, rational thought to it. He takes that verse and says, oh, well, yeah, that's just his decreeing, or his revealed will, or, this weird will thing so that he can say that it doesn't mean what it says.
Yep.
Because it's inconsistent with the rest of his theology. He believes in decretalism. Well, that's what God's doing. He's decreeing all men everywhere to be saved. But James White doesn't believe all men everywhere are going to be saved. So his decree isn't taking place.
And so, if man cannot do other than what God's decree is, then technically there is no such thing as sin.
Right. Well, or it's a sin to do the will of God.
Sin is rebellion to the decrees.
Yeah. If everything if it's impossible to do anything contrary to the will of God, which is what Calvin says, then it's a sin to do the evil God, to do the will of God. And when you do evil, you're doing the will of God. So it's evil to do the will of God. This Romans 8 thing, he's talking about the Jews and the Gentiles, that God works all things for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. He's called both Jew and Gentile. For those God knew, he predestined, which is both Jews and Gentiles, to be conformed to the image of his son, that they might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters, because Christ is the firstborn from the dead. And then the Jews and Gentiles, yeah. So those he predestined, he called. Those he called, he justified. Those he justified, he will glorify, which is Jews and Greeks, Jews and Gentiles. So it's just frustrating to see somebody take this and turn it into this, like I said, this logical linear. You pull out these nuggets, these little propositional truths, and then you combine them into logical syllogisms and make it mean something that it doesn't mean.
Yeah.
Like what James White does.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm sorry. You
On that note, before we lose
woke me from my slumber here. Got me going.
before we lose our self-control.
Yeah. So,
gentlemen, thank you so much.
Yep.
I'm going to go ahead and call this a night, and because I think we made good progress tonight. So hopefully it'll be one or two more episodes in this series. So if you haven't watched our first few, please go check those out. If I haven't made a playlist, I'll make them into a playlist to make it easier to find everything. And if you haven't checked out Jordan Ferrier's channel, Not a Tame Sheep, go check that out. Get his book on Amazon. Buy Will Hess's book on Amazon. It's a terrific read, and it's already getting good reviews. If you are a Calvinist, please read it and give him a bad review. He needs some humbling or something. Sure.
Yeah, our next episode is going to be on divine simplicity.
There we go.
It's going to be how Aquinas used divine simplicity to refute determinism.
All right.
And I keep reading this verse, 2 Peter 1:3.
Yeah.
His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. And that's part of the concept that we're going to be talking about on the next episode about divine simplicity. So,
and that's on Not a Tame Sheep.
Yeah, that'll be on Not a Tame Sheep. So, Vince and I do a thing where we sit and talk about it for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And so we've done that twice, trying to get this one right, because it's not easy to understand, so I'm really trying to simplify it so that it's easy to understand, so people can understand, and it will help you in application when you're reading the Bible, like when you're reading, what we were just talking about, where these terrible things happen. And then how is God, we would say allowing, can't he heal? But yeah, so, and then that he's always working to bring good out of evil.
Awesome. So, any closing thoughts, gentlemen?
No. Very, very similar passage. We talked about James 1, call back to also Romans 5. If you guys haven't checked out Seeds Kids Worship, it used to be called Seeds Family Worship, but it's called Seeds Kids Worship now. But they make Bible verses into songs, and they have one for Romans 5, 1-5. And I actually played that for my Connect group the other day, because that idea of like, we rejoice in hope of the glory of God. But more than that, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. It's similar. It also carries that same thought of like, God is trying to work out these things in us if we'll let him, if we'll get out of the way, if we'll participate with the Spirit. God is working good things in us to make more people that look like him and more people that act like him. And seeing those progressions and seeing those lists of the things that God is bringing to the table and wanting to work out in us ought to be an encouragement and an exhortation to anyone who struggles with who they are. I mean, like a negative view of who they are, to see that the Lord is desiring to work all of us into becoming people who are like him, who engage the world like him, who do things naturally like him, not through religion, but through character.
Yep. I think
Also, don't forget to check out my channel. We'll just backfill that if I ever make one. That you can just I'll record the
Another
name of
dad
it.
joke. It's
Yeah.
another dad joke.
I love it. Steven
Yeah.
doesn't know it, but he's probably going to end up the co-host on this channel. So
Yeah, great.
we're in the same time, but heck, we're in the same time zone. We live an hour from each other, but we still haven't met. So every time he gets close to Nashville, I'm busy at work, and every time I get down to Murfreesboro, it's after dinner time. So anyway, I do think, though, in light of some of the things we talked about today, particularly the fact that Jordan decided to go on the James White Calvinism rant, let's end this with what has become one of my favorite C.S. Lewis quotes. And I'm going to butcher the quote, but I'll get the gist of it. And he says, "In the end, there are two types of people: those who say to God, 'Thy will be done,' and those who say to God, 'My will be done.' And God will honor the wishes of those people." If you're truly wanting to walk this walk and you're wanting to renovate your faith, you have to look at God and say, "Thy will be done."
will be
Willing to go through the pain, to go through the problems, to go through the growth, to go through the fellowship and the deepening and the times of not understanding and the questioning and the Job and the Daniels and the lion's dens and the fiery furnaces and all of the struggles. But in the end, you will look back and say, he's been faithful. He is true. He is working all things out for good. So as you go through your renovating process, as always, we pray that the Lord will bless you and keep you, that he will cause his face to shine on you, that he will turn his face towards you and be gracious unto you and give you peace. Thank you for listening to the Renovating Faith podcast. If you are interested in sharing your story, please click the link to the guest form in the episode description. For more content from Renovating Faith and to be alerted when we upload new videos, please subscribe to one of our podcast channels. For merchandise, visit our store at renovating-faith.creator-spring.com. Please join us again next time on the Renovating Faith podcast.